delighted to introduce our speaker for today. Notice I have no notes because he is a world-famous psychologist studying tobacco dependence who I've had the good fortune of knowing for many years, so I need no notes. Ben Toll is currently Associate Professor of Psychiatry at the Yale School of Medicine, and he's the founding creator and director of the Yale Smoking Cessation Service, which is a premier service nationally. I think Ben has done research in a number of areas related to tobacco use, and I think what among the things that he is most well known for is his work looking at the framing of different messages and how it affects motivation and behavior around tobacco. But what he also does is he creates these very innovative behavioral interventions based on psychological theory for tobacco dependence, and it really is a unique space in the tobacco dependence work. And in addition to that, he's also done research on a variety of novel treatments, including medication therapies and so forth. But we're really delighted that he's come to speak to us today and share with us his work on message framing and motivational interventions to encourage tobacco and alcohol change behavior. So thank you so much for coming, Ben.
Karen, thank you very much for having me, and thank you, Bob. I really appreciate you and Bob inviting me down. I've known Karen since the TCORS, so it's been quite some time. It's been a lovely collaboration, and I'll thank you in the talk too, as you'll see. So it takes a village to do studies like I'm going to present. So I especially want to thank our funders, notably the NCI and NIDA and the New York State Department of Health. And I have to note that, and I'm going to mention this, I have funding for a grant from Pfizer for greater than $10,000, and that was for medicine only. So I'll tell you kind of what that study is. So we have to define the problem first, right? And so this is from an actual Yale patient. I've blacked out his name, that was presented at Tumor Board a few months ago. And this is this person's lung problem, and this is the driver of this problem. So this is a cut right here, and this is his pack of cigarettes, and there's two left, as you can see there. So it's rare to get such a clear picture of a lung lesion and the driver of that lesion. So smoking accounts for about 480K deaths per year, and so this was just updated in the SGR that came out in January, and the latest CDC reports got us down to a smaller number. So this number was 20% in 2000, and now it's down to 18. So it's going in the right way. But there are still plenty of smokers, as we all know. I'm going to spend just a tiny bit of background. This is a very knowledgeable group, but we know that smoking has at least 250 harmful chemicals, at least 50 cause cancer, and these are really bad things like cadmium and benzene and arsenic. It accounts for about a third of cancer deaths. For certain cancers like lung, it's almost 90%. So it's a really pressing issue. So what are the messages that are the most helpful for quitting smoking? So we think of messages in terms of being gain-framed or loss-framed. And so a gain-framed messages is one that focuses on the benefits of quitting smoking. A loss-framed message is one that focuses on the costs of continued smoking. So these are warning labels from Haifa, Israel. You can see the Hebrew right there. And so, these are very clearly loss-framed, right? So if you smoke, you'll die younger. It will cause a slow and painful death. See, this is the kind of thing that we won't do in this country. So in this country, and so these are some of the old ads that were proposed, and so there were 9 that were proposed and were struck down. And this is a loss-framed ad. So, and just a sidebar, I don't really think it's that great of an ad too, because, it's that great of a warning label too, because you can't even really tell what these are very well. And so this is a pink lung, and this is a blackened lung. And for me, I mean, I can't even tell that these are human lungs that well, and probably most lay people can't. But smoking causes this problem. This is loss framed. So the former director, it's Mitch Zeller now. Before Mitch, the former CTP director was a guy named Bopper Deaton, very nice guy. He did a great job starting up with the CTP. Here's me trying to convince him to choose at least one game frame ad. You can see I've got like, I'm like, please, I'm going to show you, I'm going to give you this research. It'd be really great. And he said that he knew me and my work and that they were going to choose one. So, and he was right. So this is the one game frame ad of the old warning labels that weren't chosen. And yes, it is game framed. So quitting smoking will cut down on problems is game framed, right? Talking about quitting, it's got this little bar. The guy's not particularly friendly or appealing. I don't love the ad. I think that it could have been technically done a lot better, and that there are ways. A lot of people ask me, well, a game frame ad, is that just smiley faces? Are Marlboro packs, are they going to have smiley faces? No, of course they're not going to have smiley faces. Of course not. What we want is an appealing ad that talks about the positive aspects of quitting smoking. So my research is based in prospect theory. Again, I know this is a very learned group, and so you probably know about this theory, and so I'm just going to briefly touch upon it. This is a Swiss Bank Prize-winning type of theory and so Danny Kahneman won the Swiss Bank Prize in 2002. At that point, Tversky had died. Prospect theory says, in the domain of gains, people stay away from risk, and in the domain of losses, people seek risk. So this is pioneered by Dr. Peter Salva in the health change way. And so this is now President Salva in full regalia at Yale. And so Peter is a psychologist who is now the president of Yale. And he's standing here with my two adorable children. This is just pandering. And so I got him dressed up. But Peter is my mentor at Yale and has really pioneered the framing to change behaviors. So prospect theory says a game frame message is more effective for a prevention type of a behavior like sunscreen use. And there are studies from our lab that have shown this to be true. For loss frame messages, again emphasizing costs, these would be more effective for a detection or screening test like breast cancer screening. And so we've shown this to be true for breast cancer and HIV testing and prostate cancer. So smoking cessation is a prevention behavior with a fairly certain outcome. So if you quit smoking, the whole world knows, if you quit smoking, you will cut down on your risk for lung cancer, COPD, stroke, etc. So in theory, a game frame message would be more persuasive because you're cutting down on the patient's risk. And we have several Yale studies that support this in the treatment area. So I'm going to go through two of them. The first, which was, I think, from TCORS, is a framing study. This was a primary care model, not a giant study, but a nice size study of frame messages, gain versus loss. We had videos, total running time of 22 minutes. We had a squeezed water bottle. We had handouts and an air freshener for patients' cars that were all either gain or loss framed. Patients got bupropion or Zyban, standard schedule, 150 milligrams per day times 3 days, and then 300 after that for a week pre-quit and then 6 weeks post-quit. And we hypothesized that those in the gain-framed condition that quit at a higher rate. So what did these messages look like? So if no one smoked, lives would be saved. And so at this time, it was 430. And because people smoke, 430K's lives are lost. Here, there's the benefits of quitting smoking or the negative effects of smoking, a positive impact or a negative impact on social life. So in this preliminary study, this was our first treatment study, we saw a change, a decent change in the gain frame group at 6 weeks. At 6 months, the effect, the p-value was 0.07. So it was close, it was in the right direction. So this led us to, so I gave this talk at a TCORS symposium and met Mike Cummings, who said, I think that you should do this through our quit line through New York. And I said, really, that'd be great. You know, I was like a postdoc or something. So I was like, that'd be amazing. And so we wrote grants at that time. Before I touch upon that, I'm just going to talk briefly about moderators of framing. So a moderator, as this group probably knows, is a way to specify for whom the treatment is more effective. So generally, we look at baseline moderators because it's the cleanest. So a variable could change post-treatment, and your treatment may have changed it. So we look at baseline moderators, and these can help us to clarify inclusion criteria and stratification for future RCTs. So we looked at, so we're very focused on dependence at Yale, and we looked at for this study, could baseline amount of dependence be a moderator? And what we found was the dark is the gain framed and the light is the loss framed. And through time, and so these changes are not significant, and these changes are significant. So through time, if you have high dependence, the gain framed messages appear to work better. So this led us to our next grant and study, which was through the New York State Smokers Quit Line. So this is a really lovely service. It's a free service to state residents. State residents can call twice per year and get a 2-week starter package of patches, and they can call at any time for counseling. So for quitline research, there have been several studies of varied aspects of calls: counseling time, amount of medication, number of calls. There are no studies that have looked at counseling content. And so we were the first to look at, so could quitline coaches be trained to give gain frame messages? And if they are appropriately trained, would smoking outcomes be preferable for callers who get the gain framed intervention? And so we changed the actual quit smoking booklets of the state quit line for about 2,000 callers. And so you can see here, instead of smoking kills, it's lives saved by quitting smoking. Instead of smoking causes these problems, it's quitting smoking will prevent these problems. And this black lung, I think, is very negative, and so we cut it. And I find these cigarettes to be neutral to negative, so we put in a more positive image. So we randomized, oh, hello. What does this say? Remind me later. Okay. All right. Great. Sorry, guys. So we randomized coaches to either a gain framed counseling condition or standard care. We gave weekly supervision by Yale psychologists, and we exposed about 2,000 smokers to this intervention. And so this is what it looked like. So in the quit line, there's a web-based form. There's like a large room, kind of like this, and it's got cubicles, and there's coaches with headsets, like telemarketers, but very, very friendly, nice people who are calling you for reasons that you want. These coaches go through an online form. And so we got these little pop-up bubbles programmed. So if you put your cursor right there, a pop-up bubble pops up. So the first bubble says, what benefits are you expecting to get from quitting smoking? Caller says, I think I'm going to save money, I'm going to not get lung cancer, and I'm going to smell better. The coach then says, I trained our coaches to say, great, so it sounds like quitting smoking is going to help you to save money and to not get cancer and to smell better. That's really great. And then they go through, and a bunch of these pop-up bubbles pop up that have canned game frame statements, plus I trained them to come back to the personal benefits that the caller specifically plans to get from quitting smoking. So we took a random sample of 20% of tapes, and we had blind tape raters, and we coded 2 game frame items and 4 standard items. We had good ICCs across a sample of 10 tapes, and we found that we could train them. So this is the difference between the 2 conditions. In the 2 game frame items, a very large difference in ratings, and for all the standard items about quit attempts and med compliance, they're all very, very tightly matched. Okay, and then at 2 weeks, we had a very nice treatment difference of about 10%. At 3 months, it went down to about 2%. We only gave 2 calls, so it was a very front-loaded intervention. But we had a very nice treatment difference at the 2-week follow-up. Again, we looked at dependence as a baseline moderator and found, and so if you cut this up, we looked at their amount of smoking, okay, and so we want this number to be smaller, be lower, and we looked at a split, a mean with plus or minus 1 standard deviation, and found that those in the game framed and high dependence had a lower number of cigarettes smoked than those in the standard care. So what are our next step? Well, we submitted a spore project of message framing for lung nodule patients, in which we're going to look at a plan to test personalized game frame videos and print compared plus standard care compared to standard care. A big thank you to Karen and Robbie. Thank you guys very much. And so Karen worked with us, and so did Robbie, on this very labor-intensive grant. Thank you guys very much. I would really like to test framed warning labels and advertisements next. So I spoke with Andrew today about the possibility of framing warning labels. So if you look at what the FDA has done to date, it's very, I feel that one, it's very loss framed. 2, the ones that they picked from a pretty big group of, I think it was about 70, were, they had issues. So 1, I don't think that they were very appealing. 2, I think they were kind of hard to understand. I know that Andrew's looked at how the messages have not totally been congruent sometimes. But I mean, my hope is to look at framed warning labels where we compare a game frame label to a loss frame label. So how would we do that? Just thoughts? So how could you do? So is it possible to do a game frame warning label? So what might the image be? It's a smart group of pen people, right? Just, there's no wrong answers here. Yes?
I was saying we have a bunch of compositionally matched images where, like, you have, say, tray coal guy and then similar guy smiling and healthy.
Right.
And, you know, this is what happens if you quit as opposed to this is what happens if you do something.
But would you pair them, or they'd stand by themselves? I don't know the answer, by the way. I'm not going to show you great ads next. This is a real question.
So we've done it between subjects where basically you get one or the other in a campaign setting, and then in an fMRI setting, people have seen all of them. So we have some data for each of those situations.
So this is a healthy person or a person with the tray coal?
Yeah, and the healthy guy's like smiling and looks happy and like he's in a, you know, direct-to-consumer advertising commercial.
Yeah.
And the tray coal guy looks less happy.
Well, I will note, if you look at the treatment ads for like GlaxoSmithKline, all of the pharmaceutical ads are all entirely gain framed. They are not at all sick people. They're active people, right? I see nodding heads. They're active people. They're people exercising. They're smiling people. They're people laughing about God knows what, right? But they are definitely gain frame images. And yeah, Bob.
Are they gain framed or really positively framed? Gain framed?
Well, I think for the pharmaceutical ads, they are gain framed because they're and I'm curious about your thoughts, but my opinion is that they are implying take our medicine and you'll quit smoking and you'll have this and you'll have this pleasant time.
That's one inference people could make from them, but the general positive affect around them, positive emotions, your heart versus say, crushed cigarette, for example.
Right.
You know, example, one could argue that somebody could infer, oh, therefore I will be just like this person and gain a lot from doing it, or you could just say, it's positive affect here, positive emotion versus dark, negative emotion, and that's really what's influencing people's responsiveness to it, rather than the notion that somebody's explicitly saying, I'll do better if I take this behavior.
Right. But wait, so Bob, you're saying that, no, but you're saying that it may be that they reply in a more negative way to the loss framed ads?
No, just to the darkness of it.
Yeah.
So if you did exactly the same image, you frame one as a loss versus one as a gain.
Okay.
So it's easier to do with language where the only thing you're varying is loss or gain, as you did in some of the examples.
Yeah.
But with visual materials, it seems to me it's much harder to assure that everything in it is, that there's nothing that isn't other than a gain frame inference.
Right.
People are making only that inference and nothing about positive affect. So, you know, there's Bandura stuff who argues at some level you can learn from associating a behavior with positive feelings.
Right.
Happy music.
Right.
Which, you know, you could say that's game frame to loss frame, or you could just say it's happy in sad context.
Right. But I don't know, I mean, I agree it's a lot more technically challenging when you have a video where you are trying to frame the whole thing positively. And in most framing studies, you cannot frame all of the text. There's got to be some neutral text. You can usually frame maybe half, and half is just neutral. So it's not really paired. It's maybe just a fact. Yes. Yeah.
I don't want to worry about you, Joe's going to...
Yeah, Joe.
So, I'm just going to kind of riff on Bob's claims here. in this gain loss frame literature,
Please.
there are two different core approaches, right? One is positive outcomes, gain frame, draw loss frame, and negative outcomes, gain frame, draw loss frame. So, so with lung disease, you've got healthy respiration, you've got lung disease. Those are two sort of equivalent outcomes, but one of them is a bad outcome, the other one's a good outcome.
Right.
And so you can gain frame the lung disease one, or you can loss frame the lung disease one. Similarly on the healthy respiration. So one taps into the positive affect component, and the other taps into the gain or loss framing. And the problem that arises is that some of the wordings of the gain and loss framing with the particular affect that particular outcome that you're talking about can get arcane and difficult to understand or non-comparable. I mean, lung disease and healthy respiration may not be even remotely comparable in terms of affect. But I think the point is,
I think they're not comparable at all.
they're not. But the point is that you've got positive consequences and negative consequences, and then you've got the framing of those consequences.
Right.
Either gain or loss can apply to both.
Well, you're not framing the consequences. You're framing the smoking as it leads to such consequences. Right?
Well, smoking is sort of assumed.
Yeah, yeah. So I think, but what you're talking about is the affect, and I think that's what you were talking about, right? That the affect is...
In images, we have positive and negative images. So for example, like grateful guy and smiling guy, or person standing, or in a hospital bed versus person in a field.
Right.
So the images, we have positive and negative, and then we have taglines that are either what are the bad things that would happen if you keep smoking, or what are the good things that would happen if you quit. So that's one set of taglines, and then another tagline that we paired with all of them was stop smoking, start living. So you could get it, what Joe's noting with potentially that comparison. Let's say you just take the negative image and you compare what are the bad things to stop smoking, start living. We have data for both of those.
Right. Karen.
So for me, what some of this discussion is getting at, to tease that apart, I guess I want to understand more about what you think are the mechanisms that underlie the framing effect. So to what extent do people think it is just affective, or is that supposed to be separate, or is it something about the depth of cognitive processing, or is it something about, approach avoidance? So what's the mechanism that underlies the hypothesis of framing being superior? And then understanding that better might help kind of tease apart some of these elements, like what makes it gain frame versus just positive or negative consequences.
Right. Well, I think there's a few things. I mean, I personally have not looked at affect, but I have looked often at perceptions of risk. So if you perceive your risk to be higher, the framing may be more potent for you. If your dependence is higher, it appears that the gain frame works better. I haven't looked at affect per se. So for our framing studies, we do a check of the manipulation and make sure that they're equally understandable, and that the gain frame focuses on the positive aspects of quitting and the loss frame focuses on the negative aspects of smoking. We specifically don't try to make our loss framed fear induction. Like, that's not our goal. We just try to do a negative frame of the facts. Please. Please. Yeah.
So have you or have other people looked at, so you're giving me examples of sort of individual differences in moderators, which is very important.
Yeah.
Have people actually looked at, are the effects of gain versus loss on intentions or behavior mediated by changes in affect? So do you see, if you do a pre-post before a gain frame message or a loss frame message, do you see differences in affect? Do you see differences in cognitive processing? Do you see differences like changes in risk perception?
So
what's like operating at, underneath that's leading people to make those choices more intensive?
So the main mediators and moderators that I know of are self-efficacy and need for cognition. And those have been shown to be fairly decent mediators, but no one's looked at affect though. So the thing that this group has brought up a bunch of times now has been affect. I think it'd be really interesting. And in our sport, like we talked about how it could be, like we're gonna give that depression and anxiety measure. I think that it could be a mediator maybe. I mean, I don't know, but I mean, we don't generally test affect in a beyond just like a CSD. Yes?
Yeah, in terms of the affect question, I wonder, one of the things we've had a really hard time with, but that if you could do better, I think would be awesome, is the arousal dimension. Like, it's really hard to get positive affect that's as high in arousal.
Right.
And so, like, with the text-based messages, you get the mediation through self-efficacy that's a pretty cognitive kind of self-efficacy, right, as opposed to like a more affective kind of process.
Right, it's more heady.
And I think the other, this is a second separate thought, is about in terms of kinds of negative emotion. One of the things we've been getting in some stuff recently that I was surprised about, I guess, is shame as opposed to fear being a really potent driver of not doing things. So this is UNA stuff, basically like increased shame makes it less likely that you process messages. So there's all this stuff in the health literature about fear, but we tried to make messages that would be threatening and induce fear, but instead seem to make people feel shame.
Feel shame. Huh. We're looking at worry too for, I'm involved in a couple-based study of framing at Duke where we're looking at worry as a possible moderator and mediator. But those data are not ready for public consumption yet. Yes?
You care about moderate. I mean, it looks like you're getting an effect, and it's good for people who have high dependence. This is great.
Right, why do we care about moderators? He's not a plant, I promise. We care very much about moderators for our future studies. So I think if you're going to do a careful clinical trial, that you want to either stratify for that variable. So I think for dependence that you have to at least make it even between the groups. I mean, we've shown in treatment studies that dependence is a clear moderator. So I plan to stratify for it. And I think it's got to be equal between groups or that your findings may.
Others besides dependence.
Oh, why would, well, as psychologists, we're obsessed with mediators and moderators. Yes, we're obsessed. And at Yale, there is a big, especially at the Cancer Center, there's a huge push for personalized medicine. So we want to personalize our messages to your problems. And so for our SPORE, it's going to be personalized risk factor. It's going to be personalized to their lung scan findings. So we're going to personalize the frame messages to their risk. So for this lung nodule, it's going to be the size of the nodule. It's going to be history of emphysema. There's a bunch of risk factors, and we're hoping to personalize. I mean, that's for me. That's the kind of next wave of cancer medicine and cancer prevention medicine. Make sense? Yes. Okay. So yes.
You can't do that, right?
You can't. Although I thought you were personalizing to Facebook friends and things. I mean, I think that you can for ads. I think that you could, right?
Yeah, I mean, maybe not on the paths, but in other venues. I mean, I think it's a really cool path to bring.
I believe that if we could personalize our communications through, say, social media, through Google+, through Facebook, if we could personalize down to a person's a person's friends, I think that would be really interesting. You're absolutely right. For a warning label on packs, it can't be personalized. But I think if you're trying to drive people to treatment, which I don't know, in speaking with Andrew, I think that we agree that that a PACS warning label is probably not going to drive you to treatment. At least that's not the main plan from the PAC warning label. I mean, we want the quit line number to be on there, and I'd love it if that happened, but that's not the, I mean, I don't think that a PAC is going to be the main pathway, probably. It could be.
But your moderator analysis also speaks to targeting there, right? Like if you have a sense
Yes.
of who's buying cigarettes the most, like, right, you could conceivably put stuff on the packs that Ben's research says should be the most effective for the people you're trying to reach the most with those warning labels on the pack.
Right, and I think, I mean, the problem, of course, in this country is our laws, right? So we're having trouble passing our warning labels. We're the only country who's had such a problem. But
Canada, it took them at least 10 years to get it through the courts. It takes time.
yeah, yeah, and there's generally a pretty big fight, right?
Yeah, and the tobacco industry loses,
Right.
and we move on.
Yeah, yeah. All right, good. Yes, Joe.
So,
I've got more slides too.
Oh,
So
you do?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So yeah. No. But please.
I was just gonna, if we were gonna just chat, I was
Yeah.
gonna throw out.
I've got a bunch more slides, so we'll talk. I love talking with you guys, though. Yes, please.
He's such a psychologist.
Either implicitly or explicitly, I hear you saying fear appeals are ineffective, they don't work as good as, you keep talking about them as gain frame and loss frame, but it's not so clear that they aren't, there isn't just a difference between more positive appeals and more negative appeals. And there's obviously an overwhelming amount of evidence, there is an overwhelming amount of evidence that fear appeals work.
Yes.
And if you take the 9 graphic warning labels that we have, the only one in our studies of some 6,000 people that tanks against a control group is the positive one.
Well, but
I know you
I
don't
would
like it,
argue it's not
understand
positive.
that, but it tanks like nothing. Like,
Yeah.
like none of the others do. I mean, all of the others are above the control group.
Yeah, right.
And that one is below the control
Right,
group.
but
For everybody, not just for general population,
Right.
not for low
Yeah.
literacy, not
Yeah.
for everybody.
Right.
And so it's a, I'd have to hear a lot to convince me that anxiety promoting, threat promoting images and claims are not as effective as positive ones.
Well,
For this behavior, I'm not saying in general.
okay. I would say for those 9 ads and for your research, I'm not surprised. And I would say, have you seen the quote gain frame ad? It's terrible. I mean, it's totally unappealing. It doesn't even feel, to me, it doesn't even feel positive. I mean, the guy is he's almost negative looking. And it's just, and there's a lot of text, and it's just unappealing. But I agree that it's not a good warning label. And what I would say is let's do that study. I mean, I'd love to compare a gain frame warning label to a loss frame warning label. But I've got a few minutes left, and I've got a few more slides to run through. And so we're going to talk about alcohol some too. So this is the problem. I just flew to Seattle for the SRNT conference, and this is our problem, right? The tobacco is with the alcohol. Oh, and look, there's chocolate too. So study rationale. So there are strong links between drinking and smoking, okay? Few quit lines generally talk with callers about their alcohol use. Smokers have a very high level of risky drinking. And so Sherry at Yale did a very nice study, came out in archives, that showed 2/5 of smokers were risky drinkers. That's a big number, 2/5. So we look at terms, so as far as risky drinking, we use the standard cutoff, which is put out by the AAA, which is 5 or more in one sitting for men, greater than 14 in 1 week for men, 4 or more in one sitting for females, greater than 7 per week. So we planned to test whether a brief alcohol intervention given to risky drinking smokers would be superior to just extra smoking cessation. And that made us look at a baseline study of real New York State quitline callers. And so we looked at a fairly large sample, this is almost 90,000 people, and found about a quarter were risky drinkers. About 2/3 drink, and about a quarter are current risky drinkers. And this came out in ACER 2 years ago. And so we looked for this quarter, are there quit smoking outcomes different? And so if you look at Chris Kaler's data, at Rob Lehman at Yale, so Chris's at Brown, there's a very clear curvilinear relationship such that the non-drinkers and the hazardous drinkers do worse than the moderate drinkers. And that's what we found. So there's this U-shaped curve. And that's true at 2 weeks, and that's true at 3 months. And at 3 months is about a 5% difference, which for clinical trials, 5% is a pretty big difference. And Mike Cummings, who ran the quitline at the time that I did this, changed me. I was coming from, just a straight clinical trials, like I've got to do a rigorous trial, it's got to be adequately powered. And Mike said, I'm running a state service, and if you tell me that you have a thing, a treatment, that can make a 5% change, I will change my state service. So it's not just that it's got to be scientifically rigorous. It's that we may help 5% more of state residents. So a quarter of these clients tell us that they're risky drinkers, and they have more trouble quitting. And so we thought that quitlines could be a great venue for helping people to quit smoking. So our primary goal was, if you give a drinking intervention to try to get them to cut down on their drinking, and you pair that with standard care, would they have a better quit smoking outcome than a tobacco intervention plus standard care? And then our secondary goal was, our secondary goal was, perhaps would they drink less? So we added alcohol questions. The counseling time is 5 minutes per condition. Specialized 2-day training. So I flew to Buffalo personally, and I trained their coaches in counseling. And then Yale psychologists, about 8 of them, would call for weekly written supervision. So they would write down, and so they would listen to calls, and they would write down feedback, and they'd send it by email, and then they'd call them. So it was weekly written plus verbal feedback. And those were 30-minute calls. So we screened clients for their drinking behavior, and we found the risky drinkers, and we asked them to enroll, and then we randomized them to tobacco only plus standard care, or drinking and smoking counseling plus standard care. And I'm going to show you the actual screenshots too. So just briefly, in the tobacco only counseling, no talk about drinking. Just gave basic problem solving, skills training, and mailed them a very popular booklet by the NCI called Clearing the Air. In the alcohol counseling, we gave them focused counseling about the drinking and smoking being paired. We used a motivational interviewing style, which is kind of my therapeutic style. And then we mailed them the Rethinking drinking booklet. Oh, brother, that thing is back. Yeah, wow, it just, time flies. All right, so next, yes. And so this is the actual screenshot where we talk about, yep.
That's a pretty game frame picture.
This is a pretty game frame picture, that's true. And so we mailed the callers this booklet, and we talk with them about things like staying active and coping with cravings and coping with negative affect. In the alcohol counseling, we try to get them to pair the drinking and smoking, and we ask them how drinking in the past may have impaired previous quit smoking attempts. We share with them the current evidence that if you are a risky drinker, that you're more likely to have trouble quitting smoking. And then in an MI permission-asking conversation, we encourage them to not drink for 1 month while trying to quit smoking. And it was a quit smoking intervention. And so we were telling them that we hope to not drink for 1 month to try to boost their quit smoking outcomes. Then after that, to stick to the risky drinking guidelines and to drink fewer than those guidelines. So we rated tapes, and again we found that in the drinking context, which is the dark blue, there's a significant difference for these drinking items. In the standard, I've got more, but I just put one up. In the tobacco only, there's a difference on coping with tobacco urges. And then for standard, like changing smoking goal, it's paired. And we presented these data at the SRNT. It's a revise and resubmit at a journal now where I hope it comes out soon. So in the smoking context, we have a significant difference of about 6%. And this is with respondents. It's the same with ITT. It's just that there's more zeros, so it's just smaller numbers. And so it appears to have worked well for the smoking outcome. For the drinking outcome, we're close. It's 0.07, and it's a difference of about 4%, such that those in the drinking counseling have a higher number of non-heavy days. Okay. So we looked at the likelihood of smoking abstinence by heavy drinking status at 7 months, and controlling for condition, those who didn't report heavy drinking were more likely to quit smoking than those that did drink heavily. And the effect of condition on smoking abstinence is not significant if you take out heavy drinking status. So, these are not rock solid data, but I think that they're suggestive data, that it appears that may have been the pathway to the higher smoking cessation rates. So why an effect for smoking and not alcohol? Well, we recommended to abstain for 1 month. We did not really, and so we didn't ask them about their drinking until the 7-month follow-up. And we suggested that they not go above NIAAA guidelines. So future studies might try to engage callers in longer-term changes in their drinking. We looked at a week of drinking, which is very practical in the quit line setting. It may not be sensitive, though, to changes, like a 30-day timeline. So it may be that we have to give a 30-day timeline follow-back, or some other quantity and frequency measure. And so this is where data ends. Now we're on to my musings. This is not data-driven at all. This is just my thoughts. So talking about smoking and a related behavior of drinking may have allowed for a fuller conversation about cues and cue-related coping skills that might affect smoking. So Jessica Cook at Wisconsin has a very nice paper in JCCP that showed that that heavy drinking smokers have more smoking cues in their social context, and so these cues have a clear implication upon their motivations to smoke. So to change their smoking, it's likely that they had to change their social context, and these changes in drinking, and these changes may have changed their drinking too, and it may have changed their exposure to smokers. And so it may be that an integrated intervention may address cues and coping strategies that are perhaps kind of more relevant to heavy drinking smokers. So next steps. So we have a randomized trial, a small pilot, where we're giving out Chantix or varenicline to smokers or patch through the quit line. This is a tough nut to crack. So it's hard to do this. And the data's not back yet, but basically what we're trying to do is give a prescription medication through the phone, which means a lot of back and forth with pharmacies and with, we're encouraging callers to contact their primary care doctor and to have them call the script in to our research pharmacy, and then we mail them out the medicine. And so stay tuned. And last, in my last 5 minutes, this is only 3 slides. If you pay smokers to quit before surgery, perhaps, like, will they quit? So we did semi-structured interviews with 10 participants, smokers and former smokers. This is cancer patients. And almost all patients said, please pay us cash. So we did that. So we did a smoking cessation intervention 2 to 5 weeks before surgery. This is thoracic gynecology and breast. This is a very tiny kind of a pre-pilot study, 4 cancer patients per group. And we compared standard counseling plus patch, or standard counseling plus patch plus contingency management, in which we pay patients to quit smoking. And this is just a snippet of what a 2-week payment schedule would be. Could go out to 5 weeks. And so we pay them for coming in and for wearing the patch, and pay them for abstinence. And they could earn up to $500. And so very briefly, our quit smoking outcomes in the experimental group were 3 out of 4 quit. In the control group was 1 out of 4. At 3 months, that degrades down to 2 out of 4 in the experimental group and 1 out of 4 in the control group. And so this is an R21 that we've resubmitted to the NCI. Last slide, I think, is our Yale TCORS is focused on flavors and modified risk products like e-cigarettes. I just did the progress report last night, and I was reading through our grant, and it says very clearly that we're supposed to be collaborating. Our Yale group certainly loves the Penn group and would love to collaborate. I would be very happy to speak with everyone at Penn concerning pilot projects and collaborations. I'm co-leading our pilot core, and this is my contact information. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. We'll rush at the end, but there was that big conversation in the middle. Yeah. Questions? Yes, Andrew.
So, speaking to your last slide and our conversation earlier today.
Yes.
So when you're doing your framing dosing, so to
Yeah.
speak, how many exposures are they getting across some of the studies that you presented? And I'm thinking of that in relation to is you're putting warning labels on a pack of cigarettes, which is going to be multiple times a day exposure.
Yeah.
Message.
I mean, the exposures, and one of the things that I wrote in our last grant that Karen read was we've typically front-loaded the exposures, and I think that we have to protract them. So I'd still like there to be a long exposure on the front end, but we've typically not done. It was very much like a psychological intervention where it was almost like an experimental or lab model, but in a trial, I think that you want it to be longer. So I think that part of why we haven't gotten long-term effects is because it's front-loaded. And I think that's part of why a warning label is a great venue, because it's a lot of exposures, and they're probably daily.
The flip side of that is you're seeing those effects which are pretty impressive with minimal exposures in an acute duration.
Yes. Yeah, thank you very much. And I'd love to do a warning label study. And to Joe's point, I think it's an empirical question. And so I think that we should do a warning label study, gain loss, do graphics and text, and text. We're thinking along. Yeah. It's all set. Great. All right. So this is exactly why I'm here. Let's make a plan. So yeah, I think I would love to speak with you about warning label research, and I would love to do that study. Yeah, Frank.
Hey Ben, if you just for a minute concede that a lot of these messages are sort of framed in the following form: if you do/don't quit smoking, then, and then you kind of fill in the blank, and you can gain or loss frame kind of predicate end of that,
Yep.
right? Is there any information or any sense of whether the quitting part, the subject part of that message, actually has its own inherent gain versus loss quality to it, and whether that varies person to person, and whether, if it does, whether that influences the effectiveness of the end part? Is quitting a positive or a negative?
That's interesting, Frank. No one's ever asked me that question. Is quitting positive or negative? Yeah.
First time in history.
I think that quitting, I mean, I've always perceived quitting to be a positive behavior, but I don't know if that's true for everyone. And what does this room think?
Before you were talking about the ads promoting NRT.
Yeah.
So they're encouraging people to purchase a product,
Right.
to use something new. Whereas a lot of other ads that are encouraging cessation are about giving up behaviour.
Right.
So it's adopting a behaviour or giving up behaviour. And I think we need to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
If we're driving medication use or just cessation meetings.
Right. But I mean,
They are positive. One is giving up, one is taking up.
right. But I would, the clinician in me that runs a clinical service would say, I think we want to promote for quitting both that they take up counseling and medications. I don't really see a lot of other options, and I try to persuade all my patients to really do both. It's not just that they're giving up a behavior of smoking, it's that they're also taking up treatment, which is counseling plus medication. Karen.
We've been working on this proposal that looks at the interactions between smoking and eating, and we're basing it on behavioral economic theory. And so keep in mind that's where my brain is right now. But
Yeah,
I'm thinking
okay.
about, and what Emily just said, and sort of taking up new behaviors just kind of made a bell go off. And, in this whole framing idea, could you actually, coming back to your question about how you might frame different things, could you think about taking up new behaviors as alternative reinforcers, and that may be some aspect of game framed messages, like a different way of doing game framed messages is about the different things that you could be doing if you're not smoking. So, And that ties in with how pharmaceutical companies, they have some medication for depression, and while they're saying all the side effects in a really low voice that you can hardly hear, people are skipping through the fields, or they're taking baths together if it's erectile dysfunction or whatever, you know. So, but is there, I mean, can we think about tie-ins between behavioral economic theory, alternative reinforcers, and really think about gain, would it be a gain frame if you said, if you stopped smoking, and you find out, maybe this doesn't work for warning labels because it has to be more personalized, but you'll be able to take up this new behavior, you'll be able to exercise more easily.
Yeah,
or
So find and replace.
For soccer in Miami, right, music.
right.
The entire campaign was constructed around the negative behavior, giving up a behavior in a positive.
So just to
And
have
it didn't work.
the same Cialis commercial,
Yeah,
right?
that's the one
The
I'm
same
talking about.
Cialis commercial, only just
yeah.
every time they say Cialis, insert nicotine patch.
Right.
And it's the same.
And then you
That'd be
just,
the perfect
right, there you
commercial.
go.
Smoke less,
What
more
Emily was
sex.
talking about also reminded me a little bit of some of the stuff that Dolores Albertine is in this department for a little while longer. What has done on action and inaction goals and prompts. And they find actually that basically when you have something that you're trying to get people to do, and you have a bunch of things that you're trying to get people to do, those things can reinforce each other. Whereas if you have something like, or your thing of stop smoking and stop drinking, like basically stopping two things, as opposed to start doing this thing and stop doing this other thing, can interfere with each other.
Yes.
And so in terms of Karen's point about other types of framing, it seems like there is potentially real benefit to this idea of, replace it with this, but the caution of not having kind of two competing things that people are trying to do simultaneously,
Right.
of the stop and the start.
Right. I think it has to be carefully done.
And then I thought at the last seeker meeting, did you guys present some stuff around quitter identity and smoker identity? In terms of the question that you were answering around, like what it means to be a quitter, that varies by people.
Yes. Yeah, and the key finding, this is Dina Shapiro's work, the key finding was that people who have both identities are more susceptible to being influenced, and over and above all of the usual measures of dependency and so on that she used as controls. Observational study, not an experimental study, because the identity has to be a part of the smoker. So it's, you might think that it would be people who have a quitter identity are going to be much more likely to be susceptible. No, they need those who had both, were high in both, were the ones that were most likely to be influenceable. It's kind of a strange finding. I haven't seen anybody else produce it, and so you got to treat it with a certain grain of salt. Still a strong finding.
So I want to everybody thank Ben for coming and engaging.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, guys.